Thank you. Wonderful. Hello. How are you? It is so good to have you here. This is a community forum, so we are going to involve you along the way. None of this 10 minutes at the end business. You are part of this conversation. And I really do believe that events like this are fundamental to shifting the stigma. 1 in 5 of us in Australia in the past year have taken time off work because of mental health challenges. Work is so vital, isn't it? It's so crucial. It's a big part of who we are. We pour a lot of energy into it. If we're lucky to have paid work, it helps pay for our rent, our mortgages, put food on the table. But it's also about giving us meaning and purpose in life. It's vital. There is an expectation at work that somehow we're going to be 100% on the game every working hour, and that's just not realistic. We're human. So when we're stressed or anxious or depressed, work doesn't really feel like a safe or inclusive or welcoming environment. So instead we worry about what our boss might think if we did say that we're feeling unwell or not up to scratch. We worry about losing face. We worry about losing our job. We worry about not getting a promotion the next time we want to go for one. All those anxieties come up, and sometimes workplaces handle these things incredibly poorly and punitively. Others are quite enlightened on it. We're going to meet a couple of employers who have really kind of walked this path and thought carefully about how they engage with these themes at work. And apparently there's now $200 million spent on compensation claims that are mental health related each year in Australia. That's an extraordinary figure, isn't it? And it raises profound questions for me about, are we actually navigating mental health and mental illness in the workplace very well at all? I suspect not, if it's landing in a compensation claim process. So let me welcome, without further ado, our special guests on the panel today. Please welcome Dr. Sam Harvey. He is a consultant psychiatrist and associate professor in workplace mental health at the University of New South Wales. He's a research fellow at the Black Dog Institute. He helped establish the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance. We have Rachel Clements. Please come on out. Rachel is working with workplaces all the time. She's an organisational psychologist. She's Director of Psychological Services at the Centre for Corporate Health and also Resilia. And she specialises in helping individuals and organisations really increase their emotional resilience and manage mental health issues in the workplace. We also have John Canning. John is a partner in a major law firm in Sydney. He's become a very effective, strong spokesperson based on his own experience of mental illness, in his case bipolar disorder, and he's a community presenter with the Black Dog Institute. So he's decided to really take it public, his own experiences, and it's been a fantastic thing. We also have Megan Kingham. Welcome. Manager of Health and Wellbeing at Optus, so a big corporation navigating mental health issues. Hey, welcome. It's great to have you here. John, let me start with you. A partner in a law firm. I mean, for a start, law, high pressure, a lot of bravado in that profession.
A lot of macho, yeah.
A lot of macho. Yeah. How often do mental health conversations get had in the legal setting, traditionally?
Oh, they're starting to be had more often. The conversations now are sort of wrapped up in part of our caring for people and treating people well. And it's just, for my sort of experience, what I found was that if you speak to people, people actually do care. That's the sort of bottom line for me. And also the younger generation are a lot more adept at having these conversations. I think they're better educated. For us old fogies, over 50s, it is a bit, difficult. I come from country Queensland. I grew up in the 80s in Queensland. That was not a place where you spoke about a lot of things, including mental health.
Take us back to when you really started having a problem, when you realised in yourself that things were going astray.
At the end of 2007, I worked long hours and did something for clients, a matter for clients, and that worked out really well. Everyone was happy. But then I went home for Christmas. I wasn't feeling great. I lived a sort of split life. My wife and children lived in the Blue Mountains, and we thought that'd be a good thing to do. I had a flat in the city, and I remember staying in there for 2 weeks, just staying in bed, crying, not eating. You know, I'd go out down to the local, IGA, get a few bits now and again, but at night. And I didn't want to see anyone. And I slept a lot, I cried a lot. And then that went on for a few months, and then my wife went on the Black Dog Institute website and scored me, I think it was 32 out of 33 on the test for bipolar, and said, "Do you want to do this?" And I scored 33 out of 33, and I thought, hello, something's up. So, that was good. So it was a combination of my wife and I working out what went on.
Let me come to Mark Jacobson in the audience. With you is your partner, Alex. Thanks so much for being here. So, Mark, you work with Sydney Water.
Yes.
And I bet you can relate somewhat
100%.
100%. So take us back to why you're here today and why you've decided to speak about your experiences publicly.
Roughly, probably 2012, I went to work one morning, and as the morning went on, what I know it as now as anxiety and panic had set in that morning. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know if I was dying or what was going on. It was actually a manager of mine that approached me and asked if I was okay. His wife is actually a psychologist, and he was quite understanding, and he sort of calmed me down and suggested that I seek help about it. And
we've landed you right in the thick of the most traumatic experience, and we should just establish what is the work that you do.
Yeah.
And you're a hydrologist.
Yeah, for Sydney Water I'm a hydrologist, and I've been working as a hydrologist with Sydney Water for 6 years, a little bit, 6.5 years now.
So did the anxiety feel like that day that it came out of nowhere?
Yeah, it did, and I'm a big sort of coffee drinker, and it was that morning that it was coffee after coffee, and I later found out that helped sort of bring it on because it hypes you up a bit, but I wasn't sure what was going on. My sort of heart was racing. I was short of breath. I couldn't stop pacing. I couldn't sit still. I just, I had no way out of it. And it was, now I look back on it, that my manager sort of stopped me and calmed me down and suggested I see a doctor.
Yeah, so that's an interesting conversation that they initiated with you.
Yeah, because I didn't know how to present to him. I didn't want to be at work that morning. I didn't want to be around anyone. All I wanted to do was just sit in bed and not see anyone, lock myself away, and try and figure out what was going on. So I had no idea how I was going to sort of suggest that to him. So it was fantastic that he sort of spotted the signs and suggested that I seek help and, take the time that I needed to sort myself out with that.
Because it's just not the sort of conversation we're used to having with our supervisors or managers, is it?
Not at all.
Yeah. And Alex has been phenomenal, hasn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. She's my rock. So I often said to her that, in the beginning, if I sort of didn't have her there to sort of guide me through, I didn't know where I would be, and that was completely honest. She was pivotal in helping me get back onto my feet, and that was where I came across Mates in Construction, and just wanted to get involved.
And talk about it publicly,
yep.
Which is a whole other step to take, isn't it?
Of course.
So beyond that moment of anxiety, did you manage to work out the dimensions of what you were feeling, of what was going on for you?
Not at all. It was sort of little darting thoughts that just snowball and roll and roll and roll into something so big that you just can't control it. And that was where I thought I just sort of wanted to shelter away from everyone. And that leads to other things. I was embarrassed about going back to work because I wondered what people would think of me and what was going on and whatnot. So taking the first step in getting help was life-saving.
And we'll talk a bit later about what your supervisor and your colleagues put in place. If there are any experiences that you'd like to share as we go, pop your hand up. Yes, please.
Hi. My name's Lindsay.
Great.
I work for Corrective Services New South Wales. I used to be a prison officer.
Tough work environment. Tough work environment.
I've had depression and anxiety for a long time, and I've had a suicide attempt. I had in the last 12 months it's escalated, and I've had 2 significant breakdowns at work, and I've been on stress leave twice. I went on a holiday to try and get away from it all to Thailand, and when I come back, I had a discussion with my senior director about it, saying, I'm pretty well stuffed. I'm pretty much going to jump off the cliff.
It's interesting that you took these feelings and what was going on for you to your manager. How did that conversation go?
Initially, I thought it was going quite good. Unbeknown to me, he was getting quite upset about it. So what happened, and I'm talking about senior staff here, I raised this issue that I had major concerns about the way I was being managed and I wasn't coping in September. And I took that all the way to Assistant Commissioner level, and I've yet to get a response, and that was in September. So by December, I erupted. My immediate manager was pushing buttons like you wouldn't believe.
So didn't take your experience and think, well, what role can I play to help you necessarily?
He had a major... I see him as being a major catalyst. By this stage, I'd up my Zoloft to about 800 milligrams.
So what could have, just to keep the conversation going, and I really appreciate you sharing that experience, and it sounds like you're kind of in the thick of it, but what would have made a difference in that conversation that you had with your manager? So support. Thank you. I think that's a really good anchor. Support. Let me come to our panel. Rachel and Sam. So many variables to this, aren't there? Sam, why do we find it such difficult terrain in the workplace, mental health? What are the things that we can get confused about in terms of our dynamics, our self at work?
I think it is. I think we increasingly understand that it's more confusing than we at first realised. And I think part of that is because where we began the conversation around work and health was when there were simple problems like dust in a mine or things like that. And it was a nice, simple thing. You measure how much dust there is, you get rid of the dust, people don't get sick. And I think we tried to take that paradigm into mental health in the workplace, and I think that's got us into a muddle, which we're now getting out of. Because it is complicated. For most people, being at work is a really good thing for their mental health. And we know if we look at what happens to people's mental health when they lose their job, that shows just how important it is. But I think because it has such a key role in ourselves and our self-identity and what we do with our waking hours, if things aren't right there, then that can have a real impact on us in a negative way. And I think increasingly we also realise that if we want to pick up when people are becoming unwell, the workplace is an ideal place to do that. And I think we heard that from Mark's story. And what struck me is even though those stories are sort of similar to a lot of other stories I hear from workers who've become unwell, what I think is surprising, particularly about the first two, is how quickly people were able to get diagnosis and help. And I appreciate that at the time that wouldn't have felt fast, that period of a few months, but actually, we regularly in a clinical setting will see people that have been unwell for much longer periods of time and haven't been able to link into help. And I think you guys explained very well why that is, because the very symptoms you're having make it hard to ask for help.
So that's when it takes other people.
Yeah,
and a workplace is a community of people
and
at
I think,
its best.
Yeah, and we do a lot of work around mental health in the community, but I think actually the workplace is a really untapped resource that we haven't utilised as a place to try and reach out to people and to try and help people recover. But I think we are beginning to do that much better now.
Isn't that a great way of thinking about the workplace as a resource for improving mental health? Hurrah! Can we get there? Rachel, as you were listening to the stories so far, you're working with employers, with managers, with corporations, all sorts of workplaces, in all sorts of professions. I mean, are there particular dynamics in a workplace that you see over and over again that if only they were tweaked, if only they were changed, the outcomes could have been so different?
Yeah, and I think that points to that very critical role of supportive leadership. And we know that a big aspect of our positive well-being when we're at work and things are going well is very much contributed by our immediate leader or line manager's management style. And they've gone away and done a lot of research and worked out what is the biggest predictive factor of positive well-being in the workplace. And the number one is supportive leadership. And that goes to show in terms of that if there was just that support shown at that time, not only can supportive leadership prevent people from becoming unwell, it can actually also really assist people in the recovery process. And people will recover a lot faster if they know they've got a supportive leader and a supportive team around them as well.
Sam?
I was just going to add to that. I think one of the things, there are some managers that are just that are naturally good at this type of thing. And I think we heard an example of that in that story. But not everyone is. And I think what we're beginning to learn is that we can teach people a certain amount of skills that gets them up to the required standard where they're being a help, not a hindrance. I think most managers know what they would like to do. I think it's more a question of confidence, of having those really difficult conversations. I think we've got evidence now that we can show that we can change that.
But also I wonder whether as employers there's a fine line where you go, well, I don't want to intrude in someone's private matters. Their mental health is surely their private affair.
I think that's
right.
A lot.
And what you don't want is your manager at work being some lay therapist who suddenly is asking you about other things. I think that the point is there's a role that managers have in being supportive, and that's a key part of a manager's role. And I think part of what we need to teach managers, as part of being a good manager, is how to know what their role is.
Yeah, because just to be devil's advocate, Rachel, we come to our workplaces with a history.
Of course.
Family trauma, maybe a history of anxiety, our individual coping styles, our individual resilience or not, as the case may be.
Yes.
Is it the responsibility of a workplace to engage with any of that, given that it's of you?
Well, I think historically it was very much, 10 or 15 years ago, it was very separate. Work and personal life were completely separate, whereas now it's not so. And we know now the work health and safety legislation that came into effect, particularly around 2012, and that goes to show if you are observing that someone is not travelling so well, regardless of causation, doesn't matter if someone's not travelling so well because of a work-related issue, or if they're not travelling so well at work because of a personal issue, or if they're not travelling so well at work because of a pre-existing mental health condition. The legislation now is in place to say if you're observing someone's not travelling so well, you are under a legal obligation to assess the risk, which means go and initiate a conversation with someone about the cause, what's going on, how can we help and how can we assist and support, and then be able to put in a management plan for them. So I think we've seen a shift in that space, particularly since that legislation came about, in employers being a lot more proactive, because now there's legislation to support that. But I still do see a lot of anxiety in workplaces around having the conversation, and I do think it's often because in a lot of jobs, managers are in that role of troubleshooting, problem solving, dealing with something, putting a plan in place and making it all okay again. And I think if managers go into conversations around wellbeing and mental health with that same perspective and mentality, of course they're going to be anxious, because they don't have the answers. It's not their role to fix it. It's not their role to be able to be that person's main source of support.
Megan from Optus, you're nodding your head at intervals here. What would you like to pipe in about? Because you're an organisation, you run a Healthy Minds initiative inside Optus to really try and engage your workforce with a whole range of different questions about mental health at work.
And when we started looking at this, which was a couple of years ago, we, like a lot of organisations, we realised we had to do something, but we didn't quite know what. And so we started. And one of the things that very much came out early in our research was
I'll pause on that. Why did you realise you had to do something? What was happening in your workplace?
The community expects it. I mean, there's a change in legislation, certainly, but community expectations. So our employees come from the community, and so there's a lot of talk in the community about mental health.
I mean, obviously in a big corporation, the tradition might be they give you a gym membership discount.
And a flu shot.
A flu shot. That's called health and wellbeing in the workplace.
Yes,
Why did you want to dig deeper?
Well, because there's more to life than that. And, as those barriers between work and life break down with flexible work, technology, etc. Of course, work is impacting on people's personal life, so we shouldn't be surprised when the reverse happens. And this is what we need to deal with as an employer. We want to keep people, we want to keep good people. And mental health issues were getting in the way of that because nobody quite knew what to do about it. And the leadership conversations were the things that came up as most important. And as Sam said, managers want to do the right thing. They want to be supportive, but often are terrified. Don't want to make the situation worse.
Sam.
Can I add one other dimension to it? And this might be a slightly unfair question, Megan, but there's a legal responsibility and there's the ethical wanting to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I assume within an organisation increasingly there's also a financial imperative to do this because it just makes good economic sense to stop people getting unwell and to minimise the harm when they get unwell.
Absolutely. And so early intervention and recognising those signs. Because we don't want people... In the past, people have just gone off on sick leave for months and months, and then somebody says, oh, I wonder what's going on there. And it's too late often then, or it comes up in a performance management discussion. And sometimes that can be too late too. So what we want to do is to get discussions going around mental health as part of everyday work, whether you're talking to a colleague or whether you're talking to somebody who works in your team.
So it comes up in a performance management discussion. I'll be really interested to hear if that's been your experience in a workplace, that somehow your experience of mental health or illness or ill health has somehow got mixed up with the complications of performance management. Very delicate. I'll come to you in a tick. We've got Pam Rutledge, who's actually from Richmond PRA, and you work with people who are having an enduring chronic experience of mental illness, don't you? This is a kind of wraparound service that supports them in all aspects of their life.
Yes, thanks, Natasha. What the point I would really like to pick up on, however, is that as an employer, and we employ about 600 people, we are a mental health service organisation, but we decided that in that context, with our focus on the value of lived experience to inform and drive the work that we do, we needed to be an employer that walked the talk. And so we committed in 2012 to achieve a target of at least half of our workforce, our total workforce, being people who identified with a lived experience for mental health issue by 2017. And at the latest count, we're at 49.2.
Can we just give them a round of applause, please? How fantastic is that? It becomes part of the selection criteria.
Yes, it is. And we have an affirmative action approach so that we actually, where we have two people applying for any job in the organisation and one of them is a person who identifies as having a lived experience, they get a preference under an affirmative action policy. And so a lot of the conversation is about how to have that, how to be open about the conversation, about the fact that mental health issues do impact on the way we do our work, just as a family issue does, just as managing or working, having a sick child or an ageing parent, that we should be able to embrace in the workplace how we can have these open, honest conversations. So our approach is to make it something that is talked about very early on. And so we encourage any of our employees to do with their manager a personal situation plan that identifies what might happen for them in the workplace, what their triggers might be, what things could occur that might make it difficult.
Okay.
And so that means that if something does happen, the manager can have a conversation. Hey, I've noticed that, or I'm observing that. And, we've got our plan. Is it time to talk about how we can help you? And so we're trying to get the conversation happening in a really open way. And it's not perfect, of course. We're not 100% there, but trying to turn it round so that it is part of normalised work experience.
Great, thanks, Pam. I'll just come to, we had another question here. Hello there. Oh, yes,
Hello.
I know your face. Hi.
I know you do. This isn't a question. My name is Judy, and I've had a lived experience of mental disorder for 50 years. I'm also a carer of two daughters who have mental disorder. We belong to Schizophrenia Fellowship, and we've been trained by Schizophrenia Fellowship in a program called Re-Mind, and I've been doing it now for about 15 to 16 years, where we go out into the workplace and share our experiences.
So do you have a sense when you're in a workplace sharing your own story, do you have a sense of the impact of that?
I know very well.
Tell us about the impact.
Well, we were told at a conference last year by a psychiatrist from America who said, if you want to do anything to help mental health and mental awareness and reduce stigma, you just have to come out and be prepared to share it and talk about it. And that way you get empathy and understanding from people.
So
Can I say, I think that,
Sam.
And what you describe fits with everything that we're learning about how you reduce stigma. That you can show people, you can show people as many PowerPoint slides as you want explaining what depression is, but it's only by getting people with that lived experience in the room, speaking with them, that's what makes a difference in a workplace. We did a thing with firefighters. These were big, tough, burly guys, and we said we were going to talk about how you have these difficult conversations. And one of the firefighters said to me, he said, mate, you give me a burning building, I'd prefer to run into that than to have a conversation about mental health with one of my guys. But, we spent 4 hours with them and it made a big difference. 6 months later, still increased confidence, having conversations, reduction in sickness absence in the organisation. So it doesn't take much to change the dialogue.
Yeah, so John, when you started to articulate what was going on for you, once you'd understood yourself what was going on, to your colleagues, to your partners in the law firm, to other colleagues, how did those conversations initially go?
Law is a very conservative profession. They range from, someone getting a lift going, hi, are you okay? Yeah. Are you really okay? Yeah. Are you really? Yeah, I'm bipolar, but don't worry about it. Or, people, when you're a bit down and out, coming up and saying, can I help you? Are you concerned? And I agree with you. When you share stories, people do show empathy and want to understand. So if you share those stories, it starts to break down the barriers and reduce stigma. And that is principally why I do what I do.
This is very much the work of Mates in Construction. And Mark, you're involved in Mates in Construction. We've got Caroline Kelso, it just so happens, who's also involved in Mates in Construction, one of the very small staff of the New South Wales branch of Mates in Construction. Let's get the mic to you. And Mates in Construction came out of Queensland. Caroline, thanks so much for being here tonight.
We're in WA in South Australia as well.
You're in WA in South Australia.
Yeah.
So actually it's about conversations, isn't it? Peer-to-peer conversations in the construction industry initially on building sites, but beyond now.
We actually go on sites by invitation, and we actually we develop community basically. So we actually train big burly construction workers on how to identify when someone's doing it tough, and know how to connect them to the appropriate help, and even to intervene on suicide. So we have 3 levels of training. We're general awareness training for everybody, where we give clear. It's from major research how to identify when someone is doing it tough, and why the construction industry is higher in suicides than other forms of death. The construction industry is 97-98% male dominated, and there's a culture there. Suck it up, princess. Have a teaspoon of cement, and don't talk about your stuff. Where we're trying to actually change that culture, that it's okay to ask for help. It's about mates helping mates. So we're actually sharpening the tools of the managers and employees, and from apprentices to everybody on how to actually help a mate. And we see it working day in, day out.
Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Caroline. It's great. And theirs is a model that can be applied to other industries. Rachel?
Yes, I was just going to say that methodology that Mates in Construction are using, this is that John's firm that he works for has used a very similar methodology, in that we partnered with John's firm to really do the mental health awareness for most of the partners and directors and managers. And then we really looked at, would somebody go to disclose a mental health issue to a partner or a director or a manager? Maybe, but maybe not. And that's when they really went that next level down and initiated a similar program with wellbeing officers. And I think we trained over 140 wellbeing officers nationally.
What's a wellbeing officer do? What do they do?
A wellbeing officer is a contact. It's a person who has undergone we did 3 hours of training with them around how do I recognise a mental health issue? How do I realise when someone's not travelling so well? How do I respond? How do I have a conversation with someone I might be concerned about? How do I refer? What are my referral options? And we designed a nice mental health intervention framework for them to use. What internal resources do I have? What external resources do I have? And how do I just keep someone on my radar and reconnect with them every now and again to make sure that we've followed up with them? So it's really using that peer-to-peer support model. And if someone's not travelling so well, they can be identified. Your wellbeing officers, their names were published and promoted, so everybody knew who the wellbeing officer was. So if I'm not so comfortable disclosing a mental health issue to my partner or my manager, I might have my buddy in the next group or someone who's around my level who I might choose to disclose that to. And we trained everyone from secretaries to paralegals to accounts people to managers to someone in marketing. So it just is across the board now.
If only all workplaces were as enlightened. Megan, you want to weigh in, and then I want to come up to you.
That's important to have people on the ground as well, because sometimes your manager might be in another state or another country, and you don't have the day-to-day interaction where they could pick up those sorts of things. So the peer-to-peer stuff's really important.
But even the word disclose, we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? I mean, I reckon we kind of need to shift even that concept, that somehow we've got this secret and we're going to reveal our vulnerability. We're going to take that little gem of a personal experience and expose it in the workplace. And the consequences can be very tough. I mean, workplaces are punitive, competitive environments at times.
They are. And I noticed that somebody was up there used the word identify as having lived experience. I think that's much better, much nicer than I'm telling you my dirty little secret.
My dirty little secret.
Yeah.
Can we come up to you? Thank you. So thanks for waiting.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Paula, and I'm a person with lived experience, and I just wanted to share about my workplace wellness plan that I have with my manager. I work in the public sector mental health service, and it's the first time I've actually got a job because of my mental illness, because I've had a history of being sacked because of it. So it's nice to actually, it's actually a prerequisite for the job, so I feel very blessed with that. And I work in a very supportive environment within a mental health service, and it was really important for me to be proactive with my plan. So I put the plan together, and then I took it to my line manager, and we now review that every year when I do my annual assessments.
What's your work plan contain that's vital?
The things that I want to see happen if I start to become unwell. I was owned by a cat until 6 months ago when she passed away, and it was really important for me to know that if I was going to hospital, that my friend Michael would be called to look after her. Otherwise my anxiety levels would be horrific. And I just wouldn't go to hospital if I knew she wasn't being looked after. They know what I need to do.
So this plan was something that was at work?
Yeah,
well.
I have it at work,
so it's both in your life, at work,
yes.
at home,
yes.
amongst your friends.
Yeah, everybody in my support team has a copy of it.
Fantastic. Great to hear. If anyone else has a support plan that they've negotiated in some way, no matter how big, comprehensive, little, I'd love to hear about it. And there's that word support again, and having a support network, which is really hard to find when you're doing it tough. I just want to bookend this thing about conversations because it's come up quite a bit. And so we bookend that part of the conversation. But Rachel, you have some great tools that you offer. In fact, all of you have got comments on this. Tools for how to initiate the conversation. What do some of those tools look like?
So this is if you're initiating a conversation
about a
with
mental health issue or challenge.
Yeah, with your manager or someone. I think key is doing some preparation for it and really thinking firstly about who do I want to share this information with? Who do I want to talk to about this? It may be my manager, but it may not. Maybe I don't feel comfortable for some reason. So it might be a peer, it might be a colleague. So the who. I think how much information do you want to disclose? There is no legal obligation to let an employer know. So how much information is certainly worth considering. I think also choosing to go through a bit of advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons analysis in terms of is it going to be in some work environments, maybe it is a very safe place to be able to talk openly about a mental health issue, whereas in other workplaces maybe I don't quite trust that it will be kept confidential, whether this might have implications for my career, whether I might be discriminated against, whether I might be just treated differently. So I think
if you're in a workplace like that, what are the other things that you can do to get the support you need to cope at work?
where you can use your other support network through colleagues or peers, maybe, using that support network, but also support networks outside of work in terms of, a lot of people have spoken about friends and family, and drawing on support outside of work can also give a lot of strength. And I know a lot of people who may be experiencing a mental health issue who don't necessarily talk about it at work because they've got very strong support outside of work, whether it's friends or family. It might be treating practitioners and professionals that they're engaged in with counselling. So there's other avenues to also get that support too.
Sam?
I think that's a good point, that we shouldn't assume that for everyone disclosing, or whatever term we're going to think up for it, is the right thing. And it is a difficult thing. I think we are lucky in the time in which we live where there is a lot of information available. There's the Heads Up website that Beyond Blue launched a couple of years ago, has a lot of information about mental health in the workplace. There's a thing on there called a decision aid tool. So essentially that allows an individual who's trying to decide if they want to tell people at work or not to kind of go through each of those steps, and it sort of guides you through and gives you a bit of legal advice, a bit of general advice and things like that. So I think, we heard earlier with John's story that actually the internet can help. I mean, it can be a problem as well. But the good sites, Heads Up, the Black Dog Institute, there's good tools there.
And you've used... Oh, John.
But I will point out that the people 2 hours of Dubbo don't have a computer sometimes.
True.
That's where, for me, doing what mates in construction do, that face-to-face is actually really important.
And Megan, you've used some of these tools in your workplace as part of the Healthy Minds project, haven't you?
We do. Because we realise that once you do the awareness, the training, whatever, that's fine, but somebody might be broaching one of these conversations 6 months down the track and they think, what was that? What was that they said in that course? So we have a lot of the materials there from SANE Australia and from everywhere that can help people have those conversations. And we're always talking about where these things live on our intranet and also in hard copy and everywhere else we can put. I'll slap it up everywhere. Just so people know that that's there when they need it, because thankfully it's not something they need every day.
Lots of questions, so let's come to you. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Jack Heath from SANE Australia. There's also some important cultural issues here in Australia about disclosing about mental illness in the workplace, and that is, in Australia we're very much such a team-based culture. And I wonder whether or not it's the extent to which we say, you know what, I don't want to let the team down and I'm going to keep the problem to myself. Because what we also found is that when people do go out and disclose, the support that's here in Australia is quite extraordinary, but we seem to have what John was talking about a little bit earlier, a little bit of self-stigma, which sort of says, I don't want to say that I'm vulnerable, I don't want to put my hand up, even though the support that we get when we do that is quite extraordinary.
Interesting. Yes, that's an interesting observation. Time is marching on, and I really want to come back to Mark Jacobson. Mark, tell us what your supervisor did with you, what you together collaboratively developed to enable you to move on.
Yeah, so my supervisor explained, my doctor had explained to me about the anxiety, which then developed into chronic depression and whatnot. And my supervisor put it very simply for me, and it was better than it's been put with any doctor, and it was basically that anyone with a broken leg is injured and it takes time for that injury to heal. You're off work for that amount of time and you do what's necessary to heal yourself with that. And it's the exact same with the mental illness, only that no one can see it. My supervisor had organised, not for me to go into work, but had organised a Sydney Water appointed psychiatrist who had more letters in front of his name than I've ever seen in my life. So through this psychiatrist, they were informing my supervisor, where I was at in life, which enabled them to help me get back on my feet, and which they did. Had me back in working on lesser hours or shorter working week, and basically whatever I needed, it was catered for.
What difference did getting treatment or support or therapy or whatever range of things that you were accessing at the same time as continuing on in the workforce, what was powerful about that combination, do you think, in terms of your own healing?
Being at work is part of the healing process as well. I found being at home, I felt useless. Being involved at work, being helped through work, and having the support that I had in day to day was exactly what I needed to get back onto my feet. And I couldn't be more grateful for the way that it was approached and the way that it ended up.
It happened on a number of fronts. So you also, if anxiety was an issue, perhaps to do less site visits.
Yeah,
for a
while. I was a bit worried at first going back to work. After having so much time off, as I said earlier, I was a bit worried of how I was going to be viewed in the workplace. I felt that I had let, someone mentioned before, the team, letting the team down at work. I'm not there to help, and when I am there, I'm not myself and whatnot. So I found getting up, going to work every day with the support that I had and still have, it gave me meaning every day to do something. I felt like I was pulling my weight that way.
Yeah. Mark,
Can I
Sam.
add something to that? Because so far we've kind of let mental health professionals off rather easy so far in this conversation. I think there is still an idea that as a clinician your role is to protect people from work until they're 100% well. And you're exactly right that increasingly we know that we have to be getting clinicians more to be thinking about work as part of people's recovery when it's appropriate. But I think that requires joint working between the clinician and workplaces and the patient. And that's a new skill for us as clinicians and something we're learning as we go.
So, John, you very much believe that work was crucial. But, yeah, so there's an interesting... You work on a few different fronts. Yes, work was vital in your recovery, but also you talk about these 8 pillars of resilience, I think that is what you call them, that you have instigated in your own life to enable you to function well.
Yeah, well, work is a part of your life, and it's a big part of your life. If you're miserable at work, you're pretty bloody miserable because you spend a lot of time there. So, in my recovery, going to work, like for Mark, it gave me self-worth and helps you overcome self-stigma. You're confident again. That's just sort of, a given. In terms of what I had to do and learn, it was, take my meds. A lot of people, the stats are, as I understand it, that a lot of men in particular self-medicate. You don't self-medicate. If you're on a drug that's going to help you with the mental illness, you take it. Well, certainly that's, if you know Gordon Parker, he will tell you pretty straight. And he knows, and you can walk in there and he knows if you're not on your drugs.
Gordon Parker, founder of the Black Dog Institute, leading psychiatrist.
Very lucky to have resources like that. Next is exercise, diet, sleep, and what I call rest. What I, if I'm unwell and, and my wife can pick it up, she says, you're unwell. We know what unwell means, mentally unwell. I have rest. Whether that's 1-2 hours, I go home, rest the afternoon, or, take time out, I take time out. The most I've ever taken out is 3 weeks, but, I can do that. My family, and all credit to you, Alex, carers. Having a good carer and having a carer for a start, but having a carer that understands, and my family, and helping them understand my illness through education has been the biggest thing in my life, And it's because, and that was not easy in, not that they didn't want to do it, and there's been some pretty rough patches in my life and certainly with my mental illness. Not that people didn't want to do that, it's just a question of understanding and education. That to me is the real part. Having people close to you and those closest to you, I can't underscore that more. If you have that around you, everything else just falls into place.
Any other experiences in the audience to that around that kind of process of returning to work? Yes, hi, thanks.
Hi, my name's Sue Gorton. I'm an occupational health nurse from 25 years in the UK, so I've lived under the umbrella of Dame Carol Black and all the work done about good work is good for you. And my job for the past 25 years has been designing return to work plans and job modification plans for people with both physical and mental health issues, because if you want someone to stay at work, all the research has shown you don't change the job, you don't create a job for someone with a mental health issue. You change the
You
job.
modify the job.
You modify the job. And there's lots of avenues for simple things. You might not need to even disclose a mental health issue to a manager, but you have to give the manager confidence that the person returning to work will ultimately be able to do the job for which they were employed, that they can still do the integral parts of that role, even if you have to modify some of them. And most of my job in the past 25 years was actually instilling confidence in both the employee that we could create the first step of a return to work they could see themselves doing. Because if you're off 100% sick, you see going back to work 100% as an insurmountable project. So if you can say, well, actually, we're not looking at 100% of your job. We just want you to see the first 25% of it. And that's what we're going to get you to do next week. And if you give them that support and confidence to do that, and the manager, then you get them back to work within a set period of time because they both have the confidence for that same journey. And the manager's just as frightened as the employee. So you have to have some mechanism in place for both of them. If you don't, I don't think you can succeed. And there's just for anyone here, if you're looking for some advice on job modifications, there's some great work done on the Job Accommodation Network that was done in America for after they had the American with Disabilities Act.
The Job
Accommodation Network has got a whole raft of information on how to modify roles for people with mental health issues. Even if it's something simple like, can I wear a pair of headphones when I'm at work because the noise around me is distracting? So sometimes it can be as simple as giving someone the permission to wear headphones.
And we'll round off the conversation today with resources. I want to pass the mic to Jenny Baines, who's right next to you, because we've been talking about, well, the fact, just the very act of normalising these conversations about our mental well-being is destigmatising. And hopefully will create future generations of workforces for whom this is just a normal part of existing in a workplace. And Jenny, you are involved in an institution, Western Sydney University, who are training the next workforce. And you are very actively also engaging in a mental health strategy with both staff and students on campus, aren't you? With this in mind.
That's right, yes. So I have the pleasure of working as a counsellor for many years with students, wonderful to work with, who are mostly under 25, who are in that kind of age bracket of developing mental illness. And also, you know, we see a lot of depression, anxiety walking through our doors. And so we have support services available for staff and for students. But many years ago we thought, well, we have this wonderful opportunity in our community to actually broaden that out and have many more broader conversations rather than the one-to-one. So we developed a mental health wellbeing strategy for the university. And we've last year finalised our mental health and wellbeing policy for the university. And under that sits a number of initiatives. And I think one of the gems is under that we do a lot of training with staff, mental health first aid training, suicide awareness training with our staff.
Mental health first aid.
Yes.
How does that work in the context of a university workforce?
Okay, so it's a 2-day program, so it's quite a commitment. And over the years, we've been running it since 2008. And so over the years, we have quite good commitment to that program now from staff. The beauty of that is it starts the conversations. It does address stigma and it talks about some of the myths around mental illness. And it's had quite an impact on our staff. We're actually evaluating the impact that this has had on staff and students.
What's your sense of the impact? Maybe some examples.
Yeah, well, an example might be we started running the training, particularly for our frontline staff, our student central staff, and we had a student who was in line and she noticed that particular student was starting to, was a bit agitated, a bit concerned, and she said afterwards her approach was quite different after having done that particular program, and she kind of walked the person up to see one of the counsellors, and that person was actually quite suicidal at the time, so it was quite an impact, and we've had a number of testimonials and statements about that that's been quite powerful. And one of the things that we are doing is working with nursing students and secondary education students and running the program with them in order to equip them to manage these issues much better when they go into the workplace. And also, we know that, sure, we've got professionals on campus and students and staff will come in and see us, but they'll talk to their friends more often. So we're working on supporting students now, and Mental Health and Wellbeing Ambassador program.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Jenny Baines, for being here. Hi, you had a question.
My name's Marina. I've been a registered nurse for about 40 years, and I'm just listening to all this conversation, and it's extremely interesting, but also the fact that working in the Department of Health with in health for all these years, I've had my own issues with depression, but I've never ever heard of a management plan. If I have a bad day at work, I speak to my boss, and it's like, okay, that's great. These are your work. This is how much leave you've got up your sleeve at the moment, and they'll listen to you and they'll talk to you, but they don't own your problem, or they won't participate with you in your problem.
And there's no framework.
There's no framework, and they're all lovely people, but it's the fact that we're time poor. We're money poor, we're resource poor, we're Department of Health, we push. Nurses are also seen, I think, and a lot of people in caring professions as being able to help yourself a little bit more, or at least being a little bit more aware. And, you've got more resources than somebody else in another capacity or whatever job that hasn't. And I think that's a big thing. I said not all people are getting looked after by like Border Board or Optus. And, we're one of the biggest employees. And I've yet to hear all those good things happening there.
Yeah, there's always a sweet irony, isn't there, that some of those professions or departments or organisations that are actually focused on health outcomes are very poor at navigating their own challenges in the workforce. Let's come to the panel and to Mark. Any final comments from you on what one key shift would undermine this stigma that we experience?
If you're an employer, or if you're a manager in an organisation, you're not alone in trying to work out what you need to do. At a national level, there's Beyond Blue Heads Up website and the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance. It's got lots of resources written for employers. Within New South Wales, we've got Way Ahead and the Mental Health Promotion Network, which has local meetings that will guide people who are new to this area to do stuff. If you're someone who's already suffering from a mental illness and you're not getting the type of work you want at the moment, then tell your health professional that needs to be part of your treatment plan, that's part of your recovery. And if you're someone who has symptoms and are not getting help at the moment, then ask for help or use one of the online resources now if you're not ready to ask for someone face-to-face.
Okay. Sharon Leadbeater from Way Ahead. Hello there. Let's just come briefly to you. What is Way Ahead? What can you offer people in this audience?
I work for Way Ahead Mental Health Association, which is a mental health promoting charity here in Sydney. I coordinate the workplace health program, and that is for any organisation that's interested in supporting the health and wellbeing of their employees. We provide network meetings for people where we bring in expert guest speakers to present the latest best practice information, whether it's case studies or examples of research in the area, the latest findings. We also have a newsletter that goes out. We negotiate conference discounts for our members to try and help with their professional development. And we also have an extensive resources section because, as the panel have pointed out tonight, there's a lot more resources out there than there ever used to be, and a lot aren't involving cost either. So we're trying to be a bit of a go-to hub.
Any final comments on stigma or otherwise? Rachel?
I think it's around education. It's around educating people and helping people feel a lot more confident and a lot more competent around having conversations with people about their wellbeing.
Mark?
One of the biggest discoveries that I've made since coming through it was a little while back I did a story with the Sydney Morning Herald involving mates in construction. One of the biggest discoveries I've found after that story was just how many people are suffering as well, who you'd never have any idea. And I think once people start to become more aware that anyone can be affected by it, I think it'll be much more easier to talk about as well.
Thank you, Mark. John?
Education at a national level. If we go back and have a look at some things that we've done very well, How did we get fit? We told Norm to be life unit. How did we sort of draw attention to people AIDS, the Grim Reaper of the bowling ball? How did we stop sun cancer, slip, slop, slap? How did we stop smoking, quit? The Victorian Road Association AIDS. We need something like that to go at the base level, at the community level. Corporates do have a responsibility, yes, but I think it's just got to grow organically up.
Megan?
I think we've just got to keep talking about it at every level that we can, whether it's business to business about the costs that it'll save, or whether it's as an employer that's looking after your people. I think we just need to keep talking about it to whoever will listen. It's not going away.
Can I thank our wonderful panel, John Canning, Megan Kingham, Rachel Clements, Dr. Sam Harvey. It's been fantastic to have your expertise and stories in the audience. Really appreciate you attending, and thank you to the wonderful New South Wales Mental Health Commission team for pulling this together so professionally and holding it at the Riverside Theatre. Thank you to our venue hosts as well. Thank you.